prosecutors were affected by bias or other improper considerations. Rather, we determined that they were based on the prosecutor's assessment of the facts, the law, and past department practices. That is correct, that is the finding of the IG, no?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And with respect to the Russia investigation, the IG said that that he was disturbed by the appearance that investigative decisions might be impacted by bias, but made no such findings, and in fact hadn't completed his investigation of the Russia investigation. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, when people talk about the appearance, whether people on this panel or the Inspector General, the appearance of bias created by those text messages might create the appearance of bias only if they're public. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Because otherwise there'd be no appearance.
That's correct.
And they were not intended to be public, were they?
Correct.
They were communications between two private individuals.
True.
Which are totally permitted. That's
correct.
Now, are FBI agents permitted to have political opinions?
Yes.
And as a 22-year veteran of the FBI, could you tell us, without naming names, were you familiar with the fact with other FBI personnel having political opinions with respect to the presidential campaign?
I was.
And were some of these people anti-Trump?
They were.
And were some of these people pro-Trump?
Yes.
Thank you. And to your knowledge, did any of the pro-Trump bias or the anti-Trump bias and personal opinions affect decisions and investigations by the FBI?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the Hatch Act.
Yes.
Under the Hatch Act, the FBI is prohibited, is it not, from inquiring as to the political opinions of people it is hiring?
I don't know the Hatch Act well enough to tell you.
Well, I'll say that is the case. The government may not, under the Hatch Act, inquire as to the political opinions of people it is hiring for non-exempt positions. And to do so would be improper. And I must say that I think that all of these inquiries about your political opinions as revealed by these text messages are irrelevant and wrong unless it can be shown, as it has not been shown, as was found definitively not to be the case in the Hillary investigation and has not been shown in the Russia investigation, that they affected any decisions in the investigation. Let's leave it at that on that point. Now, Mr. Strzok, what is the FBI's policy? Oh, and let me say one other thing. It is prudent, and I'll observe this because you said you couldn't answer, but it's obviously prudent of Mr. Mueller in finding these texts and hearing about all these text messages to think that they might be subject to incorrect interpretations on publicity, and in order to avoid the kind of attacks on this investigation that we are seeing from Republican members of this committee and from the administration, to ask you to leave that investigation having nothing to do with your competence or fairness in the investigation, but simply to somewhat insulate that investigation from unfair attacks. Would you think that might be a correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Strzok, what is the FBI's policy with respect to its agents commenting publicly about an ongoing criminal investigation?
We don't do that.
Sorry?
We do not do that.
And why is that policy in place?
I think for a variety of reasons. One, I think it is inherently unfair to the subject to that investigation. It can tend to skew the conduct of that investigation, other witnesses, other future investigative avenues. It can skew potential jurors in the event that a case is taken to prosecution. I can think of any number of reasons why we don't do that.
And are you thank you. Are you familiar with the Inspector General's report on the FBI's handling of the Clinton investigation?
I am.
And that report was highly critical of Director Comey, was it not, for, among other things, departing from protocol and commenting publicly about an ongoing criminal investigation.
It did say that, yes.
It was critical of him.
Yes.
And for doing that. And although some people have said that they don't agree with the decision not to charge Mrs. Clinton, in fact, the departure from protocol was the first departure from protocol, I should say, was Director Comey's commenting on on his opinion about her handling of various emails and so forth, having decided after she wasn't being charged, his departing from protocol was publicly commenting about that. Was that not one of the deviations from protocol cited by the report?
By the report, yes, sir.
Thank you. Has the FBI asked you to adhere to that policy of not commenting on ongoing criminal investigations, namely the Russian investigation, for example, today?
Yes.
How so?
They instructed me. My understanding is that General Counsel for the FBI met with Chairman Goodlatte and his staff and came up with an approved list of topics that I might speak about, and that outside of that list, that I was not to discuss anything having to do with ongoing investigations.
Thank you. And I will simply observe that asking you or anybody else, like Mr. Rosenstein, to comment on ongoing criminal investigations is against policy and is liable to taint those investigations and to damage the reputations of people or to even endanger the safety of informants, as you have said. Mr. Strzok, you're an experienced counterintelligence official. Can you explain why, briefly, because I think you touched on this in Mr. Cummings' questions, why the investigation to the Russian government's attack on our elections and other critical infrastructure is important to our national security?
I think it's extraordinarily important because of what it represents. The selection of our nation's leader, of the chief executive, of the person who is charged with the defense of the United States and national security of the United States, whether that's militarily or economic, there is no greater responsibility in the land. And the way we do that, the underpinning of what we are in America, the election, is the process by which we do that. So the idea that not only a foreign nation, but an advanced, hostile foreign nation would be inserting themselves clandestinely in that process to undermine the will of the United States people is terrible.
Thank you. And is that why you thought it important to prioritize, and I think it was in October of 2016, the Russian investigation, and leave Mr. Wiener's laptop to someone else you asked to look into it?
The first reason I did it is because the director told me to. The director said it was our top priority, which was relayed from him and AD Priestep. And the second thing was, yes, clearly when you look at an allocation of resources based on the threat to national security, the Russian influence investigations are a much greater impact than a mishandling of classified information investigation.
Thank you. But the first reason is the director told you to.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. How frequently does the FBI engage in counterintelligence operations against foreign powers?
Every day.
All the time?
Yes, sir.
And how frequently does the FBI investigate a possible conspiracy between a presidential candidate or campaign and a hostile foreign power?
This is the first one I can remember in my lifetime.
So is it fair to say that we are in unprecedented territory?
Speaking from my experience, that's fair.
Speaking from your experience?
From my experience in the FBI, I can't.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And is it fair to say that our country faced and is possibly still facing a grave threat from a hostile foreign power?
It is.
Thank you. I think that is correct, Mr. Strzok. We know that Russia, after successfully interfering with our last elections, is actively working to disrupt the upcoming elections in 2018. We are told this by all of our intelligence agencies, all of whom still stand by their 2017 assessment that the Russian government waged a complex campaign to influence the 2016 election to the benefit of President Trump. Last week, the Senate Intelligence Committee, on a bipartisan basis, confirmed this assessment. And the Director of National Intelligence testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee about an even more urgent threat. Quote, "There should be no doubt that Russia perceived that its past efforts as successful and views the 2018 U.S. midterm elections as a potential target for Russian midterm operations." Close quote. And what is the majority's response to this problem? To launch an investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails and to do as much as they can to undermine Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who is running what is perhaps the most consequential national security investigation of this generation. When they aren't bullying you and Ms. Page, Mr. Strzok, the Republicans are usually taking aim at Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. And just as they insist on asking you questions about an ongoing investigation, questions you cannot answer, the majority insists on demanding some of the most sensitive information in the Deputy Attorney General's possession, documents he cannot provide for the same reason. They want copies, for example, of the scoping documents that lay out the special counsel's exact lines of inquiry. Such a disclosure would be dangerous and unprecedented. Republicans are in effect demanding that DOJ violate the very policies the Inspector General criticized the department for violating in 2016. This is incredibly inappropriate and dangerous, and we are forced to ask ourselves, why? Why have House Republicans been so dismissive of Russia's attacks on the United States? Why are Republicans so intent on destroying public confidence in the Justice Department and in the special counsel's investigation? Why have they abandoned House rules to pick totally unnecessary fights with you, Mr. Strzok, with Lisa Page, and with Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein? The obvious answer is because they are scared. Because President Trump is scared. Because the special counsel's investigation is operating at a breakneck pace and has already produced 5 guilty pleas and criminal charges against 23 individuals and entities. Because accountability is coming one way or another, and they are scared, and they are trying to undermine the investigation and to distract attention. Now, I must say the basis of many of these questions that we are hearing today of Mr. Strzok by the majority, by the Republicans, is the 11-hour interview with Mr. Strzok. And I now call upon the majority to release that transcript in full today. This will show that this is the entire joint investigation is at best a partisan distraction from more important matters. But the witness before us today, Mr. Strzok, testified not under confidentiality, but not under confidentiality rules, but in private for 11 hours. There is nothing that prevents the majority from releasing that transcript. Selective portions of that transcript have been leaked by members of the majority, misleading portions taken out of context. And I don't know if demand is the right word, but I demand insofar as I can that transcript be released in full so that people can see it, can see the testimony today, and can make better judgments. And I ask the chairman now to order the release of that transcript. Will the chairman do so?
Not today.
Will the chairman ever do so?
You can direct your questions to the witness. That's your time to do that, not to discuss this.
I will observe that the chairman will not answer the question and that this is part of the continuing evasion and attempt at obfuscation, because
Will the gentleman yield?
No, not at the moment. I will in
Very
a moment
good.
when I finish the sentence. Because we know the pattern. And the pattern is we're not releasing transcripts except parts of them that may convey the impression, false or true, that we want to convey. There is no legal reason why this transcript should not be released. There is only a partisan reason why this transcript should not be released. There is no valid reason why it should not be released. If there was a purpose to our inquiries, to our spending 11 hours, there's no reason they shouldn't be released. I'll yield now.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I would just say that it is very customary in investigations to keep transcripts of private interviews until the conclusion of the investigation. This investigation certainly hasn't concluded, and it is very appropriate that the questions that were asked and the answers given are not shared with other potential witnesses.
Reclaiming my time, I will observe that many of the same questions are being asked today, number one. But number two, given the fact that selective portions of the transcript have been leaked, I think that changes it. I'll yield to Mr. Cicilline.
Well, I was just going to inquire. I've sort of been trying to get the answer to this question, but to the extent that this transcript is available to all of us, I intend to release it. I can't find any prohibition that makes us unable to release it in our rules. We now have the same witness after 11 hours here in a public hearing, so the notion that we have to somehow keep this secret while pieces that are being released is doing a real disservice to the American people. And I'm asking the ranking member, is there any reason this afternoon I can't just release it as a member of this committee?
Would the ranking member yield?
Let me, 1 second. I'm not aware of any, but I have to look at the House rules and all. I will yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. It is correct that both members on the Republican side and the Democratic side have used quotations from the transcript for the purpose of interviewing a hearing, and that is a legitimate use of the transcript.
And I'm reclaiming my time. Some members have also used it for the purpose of talking to the news media, and that may be or may not be an appropriate use. But be that as it may, the transcript should be released. I yield back.
Gentleman yield.
Yes, I'll yield to the gentleman from Maryland.
I'd like to ask the ranking member, if it's legitimate within the rules of the committee in the House of Representatives for members to release certain portions of the overall transcript, is there anything that would prevent us from releasing the entire transcript?
I'm unaware of anything that would, off the top of my head, that would prevent a member from releasing the transcript. But that's off the top of my head. I wouldn't want to say that definitively.
Mr. Chairman, are you aware of anything that would preclude us from doing that?
Yeah, the decision is made by the chairman of the committee.
Before I yield back, let me just say, we don't want portions released.
I'm not in the practice of having the chairman of the committee make decisions for me. So could you explain to me, is there a rule that precludes me from this afternoon releasing this transcript? If it's just your preference, that's not sufficient.
This is a conduct of an investigation. The chair of the two committees are conducting that investigation. We will decide when transcripts of private interviews are going to be released. No one on this side of the aisle has released it other than to ask a question based upon it in a hearing, which is an appropriate use of it.
Reclaiming my time.
We could release it as part of this hearing.
Reclaiming my time, I will observe that some members have released parts of the transcript by being quoted in the media, not for questions here. Does the gentleman from Rhode Island still want time?
I just have a unanimous consent request. I'd ask unanimous consent that the transcript of this witness be made an official part of this record in its entirety.
I object.
Objection is heard.
The gentleman from
roll call vote.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Again, Mr. Chairman, I think this is of tremendous interest to the American people. There's an effort here to sort of characterize this witness's behavior. Much ado has been made of it. We had an 11-hour hearing in which this very same witness testified. He's now testifying consistently before the American people. There seems to me no good reason, other than a personal preference of some apparently, that this transcript not be released. And I would say to the chairman respectfully, if there is no prohibition, the fact that you would prefer we not is insufficient to persuade me and I think Mr. Raskin, and we intend to release this transcript unless someone presents us with some rule under our House proceedings or this committee that prevents us from doing it. And we'll give you till 5 o'clock this afternoon to present that. Otherwise, we intend to release the transcript.
Reclaiming my time. I'll simply, I want to associate myself with the remarks of the gentleman from Rhode Island. I would agree with him. I think it would be a public service to release these transcripts. That's why I demanded they be released. There's no good reason not to. And at this point, I think I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The chair wants to respond to the gentleman from Rhode Island. First of all,
yield back the balance of my time.
First of all, there was an agreement in the interview that it was private, confidential, and that it would not be released. So that is not going to take place under this set of circumstances. Secondly, if the gentleman, we're here investigating irregularities conducted in investigations by the FBI. If the gentleman wants to perpetuate that by creating irregularities here and releasing questions so that other potential future witnesses can read the question before they're asked, that is, in my opinion, exactly what many on the gentleman's side of the aisle have been all about, attempting to disrupt this investigation and this hearing process from start to finish.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Strzok.
Would the gentleman yield?
Reclaiming my time.
Mr. Chairman, I object.
Mr. Strzok, would you object to the release of the transcript of that hearing?
No, I would not object.
Thank you. I will observe then that the minority, the chairman says that there was an agreement, not on the conduct of that hearing. The minority was not party to that agreement. There may have been an agreement between Mr. Gowdy and Mr. Goodlatte, but at no point were we asked.
It was stated on the record in the hearing.
It was stated as a decision, as a fact, as a fait accompli. We were not asked. We agreed to nothing because we were not asked. And we think that the transcript ought to be released for the reasons stated. And if the witness doesn't object, I don't know why the majority should object. And I yield to Mr. Meadows.
If the gentleman will yield, in earnest, I will be glad to work with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about releasing all relevant information. I mean, I think if we're talking about full transparency, let's talk about full transparency in a variety of other things. You know, it's interesting we want to release one thing, but yet we're somehow allowing Peter Strzok to suggest that there's a whole lot of things that are off the record. And so, but I will work in earnest with my colleagues.
I appreciate the gentleman, and let me simply say that we are not disrupting a legitimate investigation into the investigation. The Republican investigation
but it is a release
is intended to and is trying to disrupt the investigation into the Russian interference in our election by the special counsel.
Would the gentleman
That's
yield?
what's really at stake.
Would the
I yield
gentleman
back.